In the year 1864, in the Hungarian city of Ungar, there was a sefer published for the first time. Subsequently, it was published many other times as well, called Lev HaIvri. The mechaber of this sefer, his name is Akiva Yosef Schlesinger. He was born in Hungary, and that's where he lives for a while, but then he moves to Eretz Yisrael. That's where he lived out his final years. The sefer Lev HaIvri is written as, at least the first part, is written as a commentary on the Tzava, the Chassam Sofer. And along the way, Rabbi Schlesinger has a lot of interesting things to say. And it's toward the beginning of the first volume where he reports, Shamaiti Maise Maharama, that he heard a story from about the Rama. What's the story? So he says as follows, that the Rama, when he passed away, was Lamed Gimel Shonim, was 33 years old, a very young man. Number two, he passed away on Lag Ba'omer in the year Shin Lamed Gimel. So you'll notice that there's already 3 logs here. He passed away when he was 33, he passed away on the 33rd La'omer, and he passed away in the year Shin Lamed Gimel, which is the equivalent of the year 1573. And moreover, V'asa Lamed Gimel Svarim, he was the author of no less than 33 volumes of Torah. Wow. And then he goes on to say that the person who had to make a hesped for him after he passed away came up with 32 shvachim. But this maspid was very upset that he couldn't come up with number 33. Like, he really needs to round it out. Rama is Mr. 33, Rabbi 33, so we need to have a 33rd. And so finally, there was a Zokein Echad that comes to him and says that the Rama had a minig in Krakow. Doesn't say Krakow, but presumably it would have been in Krakow, that every Purim he would wear a mask, and he would don a costume, and he'd go around the Jewish homes, and he would say in every house, Sumaitiv Bizmane. Sumaitiv Bizmane, right? You have to remember that at this time it was the norm for the shamish of the shul to go around and to clap for Shacharis and to make announcements and achrozes in the street. So here the Rama himself dressed up, and he's the one who made this announcement about coming to shul, Ma'iriv Bizmano. And that rounded out the hesped for 33, and this is the Maisa that Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger writes in his Sefer Lev HaIvri. Now, a few comments about this story. Number one, the Rebbe cited this story on numerous occasions. The Rebbe once said that he was flipping through a Sefer, and he saw this Hanhaga about the Rama, and this inspired the Rebbe's Hanhaga of reminding people at the end of the Fabrengen to make a bracha achroina. Okay, so there wasn't a bracha achroina, there it was maitiv. All right, the Rebbe discussed the difference between the two. I don't want to go too far into that, but that's ha'ara number 1 about this Maisa. Ha'ara number 2 about this Maisa is, we have from the Rama a number of Svarim. It's nowhere close to 33 Svarim. So unless many of his Svarim were lost, something is wrong here. The next comment is about the year of the Rama's passing. This is something that I remember discussing with my father, and my father taught me many years ago. That the Rama, it says here, passed away in the year Shin Lamed Gimel, 1573, on Lag Ba'omer. The problem is that the Rama is a matzeva. And in his matzeva, it says Shin Lamed Beis, that he passed away Shin Lamed Beis. There is a sefer from a student of the Rama that's called Tzemach David, and in that sefer he writes clearly that Rama passed away in the year Shin Lamed Beis, which is also what we have on his matzeva. So that's the next ha'ara about this particular Maisa. But the most important ha'ara for today's purposes from this Maisa is about the fact, the statement here, that the Rama passed away when he was Lamed Gimel Shanim, when he was 33 years old. Because most of the tshuvas of the Rama do not have a date. I'm not going to say it's the only one that has a date, but it's one of the only ones that has a date. It's Siman Yud. And Siman Yud is from his tshuvas, and that's our focus tonight, is going to be on this tshuva. And this tshuva has a date. The date is Yom Aleph, Sunday, Arba Yom V'Chedesh Elul, Shnas Shin Yud. 4 days, Dalet Elul, in the year Shin Yud, which is 1550. So, if you follow the math here, if he passed away in 1572 at the age of 33, then he would be in 1550, 11 years old. So that means his tshuva would have been written when 11. Now, you may say that's not impossible for a Gadol B'Yisrael to write a tshuva when he's 11. Okay, but the thing is, someone was writing for his opinion. And as you're going to see in this tshuva, he's giving out charomim. He's saying achera. It's very hard to imagine that an 11-year-old is going to be giving out charomim. So, B'Pashtus, this Messiah also, about him being 33 years old, is probably inaccurate. It probably does reflect the fact that the Rama passed away at a relatively speaking young age, though I don't think anyone knows for sure exactly how old he was, and en kan hamakim to get into that particular discussion. Now, before we get into the meat of the conversation, there's one more issue. Because we're talking about problems, I'll throw in another problem. And that is, if you take out a calendar and you flip back to the year 1550 in the year Shin Yud, and you look to Dalet Elul, you will see that Dalet Elul was not on a Sunday. Dalet Elul was on a Shabbos. And in fact, as my father is pointing out, Dalet Elul can never be on a Sunday. It goes against the rules of Lo Yadu Rosh. If you're going to have Dalet Elul on a Sunday, then inevitably you're going to have Rosh Hashanah on probably the Sunday, but I'm not sure. But anyway, so that's a problem here with the date. The year is for sure accurate. Shin Yud is happening because we know the story that happened here happened in the year Shin Yud. So there's no doubt that the year is accurate, but something is wrong here with the date, and I don't know that we know for sure which date, actual date, this tshuva was written on. What's going on in this tshuva? So let's jump right in. There's a concept of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach that you have in the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says as follows: Sheva Mitzvahs Nistavu B'nei Noach. There are 7 mitzvahs. Then it goes on to say there's dinin. We're going to talk more about that soon. Birchas Hashem, about speaking improperly about Hashem. Avodah Zarah, idolatry. Gila Arayis, certain forbidden relationships. Shvichus Damim, murder. Gezel, robbery. Ve'ever min achai, and consuming flesh from a living animal. Frexich to Shaila, what is dinin? What does dinin mean? So if you look at the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Perek Tas, Halachah Yudalit, we find that the Rambam says a very narrow application of dinin. What's dinin? Chayavin lahoishiv dayanim v'shoiftim b'chol pelach u'pelach ladun b'sheish mitzvahs elu. Dinin is that ayos, there's the other 6, so you need to enforce them. So the dinim is to set up courts to enforce the other 6. This is a very minimalist position on what the role of dinin is. The Ramban in Bereishis Perek Lamed Daled says, no, dinim is not only lahoishiv dayanim bilvad. It's not only about putting out judges to enforce and to adjudicate these other 6 issues. No, dinin is a whole area of law. It's a new area of law. It's not just courts. It's also law. Dinei gneva, because remember, gneva is not part of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. Only gezel. Gneva and gezel are not theft, and robbery are not the same thing. Gneva, oina, that's price fraud, and oishek is wages fraud, which is schar sachir, and how you pay your employee, the dinei hashoimrim, the shomer chinam, the shomer sachar, the oines, the mafata, those the issues of rape, etc., of its nezikin, monetary damage, chayvol bechavere, malva v'loiva, borrowing, lending money, mekach umemkar, laws of buying and selling, all of these, similar to the way that Jews have laws for all these things, so too, Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, one of them includes an area that is all these things. So Rambam is put up judges to enforce the other 6, and the Ramban is saying it's a vast area of interpersonal law. Basically, what all secular systems, all the legal systems that exist in the world. Now, if you look at the Ramban's words at the end, what does he say? Ke'inyan hadinin shenistavi Yisrael. What does that mean, ke'inyan hadinin? I can interpret this way, 2 ways. One way I could say what he means over here is, just like generally there are laws for Jews in this regard, so too generally there ought to be laws for Gentiles in this regard. Should they be the same law? Should it be that the shomer chinam, if there's 2 goyim, 2 non-Jews, and one deposits another thing with the other, right? And it's a shomer chinam. So is a din that Gneva and Aveda is potter? I don't know. No, the Rambam doesn't mean that. He just means in the same way that there's law for Yidden like that, so too it should be for non-Jews. Or you could understand this in a more maximalist way, that he means Ke'inyan adinin, just like. I don't tend to think that's what he means, but you could say that. Well, the reason I'm saying these 2 possibilities is because the Rama wants to say the second possibility, not that he's touching it in the Ramban. He's not touching it in the Ramban. But he does speak about this concept the way the Ramban does, that it's very broad, and he goes so far as to say that not only is dinin mean not just judges negating what Rambam's doing, and it's this vast area of law, but in addition, this vast area of law has to be in the way that Yidden, the same halachah is the way it's in Yidden, in his Lashon, in Shal Shuras Harama, Simin Yud, Shedine B'nei Noach Ein Oisan Dinim Shenitztavu Yisrael B'Sinai. It's the exact same din. So therefore, one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach essentially is that when an employee is working in the field, you have to let him eat from the crop, from the fruit. That says it in the Torah, presumably it's only about Yidden? Yeah, but it's the same law applies to non-Jews. Shomer Chinam, in the world of non-Jews, is pater from Gneva and Aveda. We only have this about dinner. So what? It's also there for non-Jews as well, unless he goes on in the Tshuva to say, if you have Yodayim Oichichos, if there's clear passages in Chazal, that's saying, and this does happen sometimes, Chazal say, for a guy it's nishtazoi. Then fine. So then there's exceptions. But if Chazal were silent on the question, then the part of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach means that the same laws, the way it's by Jews, should be by them as well. Now, where do we get this? Question's at the end. It's a mevalvel. Where do we get this from? We get this from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. He wants to make the case. He wants to prove it from a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis presents, asks the Shaila Azot, Menani Mili, where do we know that there's a concept of Sheva Mitzvah B'nei Noach from Amar Rabbi Yechanan? Says Rabbi Yechanan, the Amar Kra, because the pasuk says by Adam, Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al Adam Lemer, that God commanded to the person, Mikol Eis Hagan Ochel Toichel, that they can eat, Adam and Chava can eat from any tree in the garden. So although it's talking about l'chayra, just fruit in a garden, Chazal derive from almost every word in this pasuk how it corresponds to one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. Very interesting limud. Vayitzav elo adinin. This corresponds to the area of dinin, that first area of law of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. How do I know that Vayitzav refers to this? So he brings the following limud. It says by Avram Avinu, Ki Yadaitiv, Hashem loves him, Laman Asher Yitzave as Banov, because he's going to command his children, and the end of the pasuk is Lasa Tztako Mishpat. Hashem loves Avram because he's going to command his children to do Tztako Mishpat. Focus on the word Mishpat there. And what do we have in the pasuk? Yitzave. We have the lashon of Yitzave, that Avram is going to be mitzave his children to do Mishpat. And so therefore there's a link between the word Tzivoy and Mishpat. So when we have in Bereshis the word Vayitzav, that's a remez for the idea of Mishpat, for the idea of Dinin. This is what Rabbi Yechanan says. And likewise, Rabbi Yechanan goes on and gives how each one of the seven is derived from one word in this pasuk. But then Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, I have a different order of how I do these derivations. Vayitzav, that's coming to Avodah Zarah. And then, by the way, the Gemara gets into a whole discussion. Where do you see that the word Vayitzav teaches you Avodah Zarah? And there's a machloikes of later Amoraim trying to show you how Vayitzav is a remes for Avodah Zarah, but that doesn't need to concern us right here. Elokim, the second word, the third word in the pasuk is Vayitzav Hashem Elokim. Elokim, Zu Dinin. This is Dinim. What's the connection between Elokim and Dinim? Because I have a pasuk in Parashas Mishpatim where it says someone needs to make a shvua. There's a dispute between two Yidden, and the lashon is v'nikra of Balabais Elo Elokim, and the meaning over there is to the judges, and so therefore Elokim is judges. And so when you have Vayitzav Hashem Elokim, the word Elokim is Yeremes for Dinim, for judges. Now the Rama says the following. He notes, interestingly, that sometimes, very often, in fact, in this sugya, the Gemara will ask when there's a machlekes between two positions, my beinayu, what's the difference? And the Gemara does it on this blot, even within this conversation, but not for the difference between Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Yitzchak. The Gemara does not ask my beinayu. Why not? One is saying you derive dinim this way, and one is saying you derive it another way. Should the Gemara not ask my beinayu? Says the Rama, very interesting answer. It's because it's so obvious what the nafkamina is between the two, that the Gemara didn't even need to say it. What's the difference? I'll summarize outside. He says the difference is as follows. He says, if you follow Rabbi Yochanan, where are you learning dinim from? You're learning dinim from a pasuk with Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu is Yitzava as Banav as Beisei Achrav Lasa Stako Mishpat. Avram Avinu is before Matan Torah. Avram Avinu is before Sinai. So what was the mishpat that he was mitzaveh his children to do? He was mitzaveh mishpat that's nothing to do with Torah. We need a system of laws, we need to get along with each other, and so we're going to come up with something. The language that he uses in the text that Rama does is minig hamadini, mishpat yoisher, or choik nimusi, some sort of system of moral law. Nothing to do with Torah. Why? Because again, we're dealing with before Mount Torah. It's what Avram is commanding his children. Now he knows you're going to ask, but I know the Gemara that says that Avram Avinu was Makayim, Kol HaTorah Kula, even Erev Tavshilin. So l'chayra, you see from here that he was observing the whole Torah. So maybe Itaka was a Torah-based ethics. So he says no. It says that about Avram. It doesn't say that about Avram's children. And in fact, he brings the example of Yaakov marrying sisters that we see that he wasn't Nizar and Kol HaTorah Kula. And so therefore he limits. This is a much broader conversation that we're not going to get into. But he limits the idea of Avram, of the Avos observing Torah mitzvahs. He limits it to Avram. And therefore, perforce, when it says, what are we talking about? Stoko mishpat that went to the next generations. By definition, it's not Torah. It's a system of morality. Very good. So Rabbi Yochanan learns Vayetzav Elu Adinim from that pasuk. What type of dinim are we talking about? We're talking about a system, a moral system. It does not need to be Torah. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, when we say the first of the Shabbat Mitzvahs is dinim, and we don't like Rambam who says it's just courts. No, it also includes laws for all areas of life. What type of law? Although it needs to pertain to all areas of life, what type of law? Anything that's rational, that makes sense, that's fair, that's equitable. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Comes Rabbi Yitzchak, and Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, I'm going to learn from Pasuk and Mishpatim. It's not from Vayetzav, which gets me Lamana Sheyetzaveh. It's going to be the Pasuk of Elikim, which gets me V'nikra Baal Bayis Elikim. That's Mishpatim. What do we say Mishpatim? Afeilu Sinai. It's all from Sinai. Oh. So that tells me, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, the courts and the laws, not just courts, the laws that pertain to all areas of interpersonal life, that is one of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. What type of law it needs to be? It needs to be the laws exactly the way they are in Torah. So in this way, the Rama is getting what he wants in Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yochanan not. But in Rabbi Yitzchak, Rama is getting what he wants, because remember, Rama wants to get to a conclusion that Bnei Noach need to follow the dinim, interpersonal dinim, exactly as they are presented in the Torah. A person's going to say, well, follow Rabbi Yochanan. So if you look at number 9, he says, no, nira lisay ki Rabbi Yitzchak. You follow, the psak is like Rabbi Yitzchak. And this gets into the science of how do we tell in a Gemara, often it's not clear, how do we tell in a Gemara who the psak din is like? So one of the cues is who gets more attention. Who gets the shaklavataria? And here we find that there's taka shaklavataria in the shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because there's a whole discussion. We said before, Avodah Zarah, he learned from the word Vayetzav. So there's a discussion. One says he figured it out this way. Another way one says he figured out another way. So therefore we see his view is getting more attention. Because his view is getting more attention, therefore the halacha is like him. He goes on to give more complicated arguments for why he thinks the halacha is like Rabbi Yitzchak, which we're not going to include here. The bottom line is that he walks away from this with the following. Non-Jews, they need to create a system of laws when it comes to shoymrim, when it comes to pikadim, when it comes to wages, when it comes to any interpersonal area. It needs to follow exactly the way it is in Torah. Goyim are bound by these same laws exactly the way Yidden are. Except if there's an exception. Okay. Now the obvious question is, this is very unusual. Very unusual for a tshuva to deal. B'chlal, we have very limited information in the b'chlal from the Rishonim and Achronim, and how much more so in tshuvas, where there's real cases of trying to understand the scope and nature of Bnei Noach. It's not a very common thing. And here we have this whole issue of a Ben Noach. What is he chayiv in, and what their system of laws needs to be. This is obviously a very curious thing. But before we resolve that issue, I want to do one more thing. And that is that Rama says in number 10, if you're going to insist, no, I'm wrong. Really, it's not like our. They just have to make laws. Doesn't have to be exactly. They could decide that a shomer chinam is chayiv on gneva and aveda. A person could say that. So he said, if you're going to say that, then I'm going to bring you a Gemara and Baba Kama. And the Gemara and Baba Kama at least is going to be helpful for where I want to go. And we're going to see that in our case here, you need to think about our case. We don't know what the case is yet. We'll get there soon. But you need to think about our case through the lens of Jewish law once you see this Gemara in Baba Kama. What's the Gemara in Baba Kama? Baba Kama daf kuf yud gimel amar aleph. Shteit azoi. Yisrael v'knani anos shabo lidin. If you had a Jew and a Canaanite violent person who came to a din in front of you, if you could get the Jew to prevail through following Jewish law, zakeu, so then follow Jewish law. And you tell the Canaanite violent person, kach dinenu, this is where we're telling you what Jewish law is. If, however, b'dinei knanim, if the only way you could find for the Jew a victory is by following non-Jewish law, dinei knanim, Canaanite law, then zakeu. Then you say, okay, we're going to follow Canaanite law. Isn't that how you paskin? This is what you say, this is what you do. And so therefore, we are going to be following that. So the Rama wants to say, apply that in our case, to say, here we're dealing with an issue of a Jew versus a Gentile, as we'll soon see. So because we're going to be dealing with a Jew and Gentiles, even if you want to say that nor the Gentile law per se doesn't need to follow Torah, but when it's a Jew against a non-Jew coming before us, what do we need to say? What we need to say is, we want to follow our Torah. In other words, the Rama is going to say that if you follow Torah, the Jew wins. So what does this Gemara tell you? This Gemara tells you that you need to do that. If by following Torah the Jew wins, so then you need to say that's what we're going to do. We're going to follow Torah. Gentile law, clearly, as is going to be apparent soon, would have given the Gentile a victory in this case. But what we see in this Gemara and Baba Kama is that in that situation, you're supposed to say, we want to follow Jewish law. So therefore, even if you don't accept my first premise, you have to accept this idea, and therefore Jewish law is relevant to this case for one of two reasons. Jewish law is either relevant because all of Bnei Noach law in this area that we're going to be dealing with should be following Torah, and even if not, but a Yois, a Jew versus a non-Jew, and we're being asked what we think, then we're supposed to, if the Jew becomes Zakai, victorious through through following our system, then that's what we need to follow. Now the only issue here is we're not going to be dealing with a Canaanite. And not only that, we're not even going to be dealing with an Anos. We're not going to be dealing with a violent person. But you don't need to worry about that. The reason is because those words are not original to the Gemara. Those words were added in the Vilna Shas, which was printed in the 19th century, is where they added those words, V'knani Anos. It used to say in the Gemaras, and this is true for all the manuscripts as well as for the early print editions that the Rama would have seen in the 1500s, it used to say, Yisrael v'goy shabo lidin. That's all it said. A Jew and a non-Jew come lidin. And so that's why the Rama felt pretty comfortable applying this to a case of a Jew and a non-Jew who was not a Canaanite and was not an Anos. There happens to be a discussion of the poskim. Is it for all goyim? What if the person is a ger toshav? What if he's an ethical guy? Whatever. And that's a discussion, and a valid discussion, and we're not going to get into that right now. Suffice it to say that the Rama, in his tshuva, didn't feel, no. The Rama felt that it was totally fine to say Yisrael and a goy, and he was happy to apply it to the Christian, as we're going to see, who was relevant to this case in the 1600s. So what is this story? What is this story that leads to this tshuva of the Rama? So let's continue reading in Shailas Tshuvas Rama Siman Yud. Let's go to number 12. So let's talk about the story that's going on in the world. There's a Jew living in a foreign land. Everyone knows about him. All right, he's drawing deep water. His water is sweet. This is all obviously poetic, metaphoric language. In other words, he teaches Torah. He expounds upon Torah. We're dealing with Rabbi Meir mi Padua. Padua is next to Venice, very far away from Krakow, and that is his name. This is a Gadol B'Yisrael who lived between the year 1473 and 1565. His yahrzeit is Yud Shvat. Okay, so this Jew, some migamoisav rayonoisav umachshavoisav, he came up with a plan. V'ishtateif echad me'anshei artzoi umigdoilel. He made a partnership with one of the people of his land, a prominent person. Tahainu yenteloimar. A yenteloimar. What's a yenteloimar? It's a gentleman. Gentleman, the closest to this would be in French, you would say a gentilhomme, right? Gentilhomme. So that's the yentalom. I don't know the reish at the end. But it's a gentleman. Now today, gentleman means he's a nice guy. That's not what it meant then. Gentleman was official class. There's a lord, right? And there's different ranks of people. So one of the ranks was a gentleman. So this guy is a gentleman. He's a printer. And Meir min Padua and this Yentaloimar, they agreed, Lahatvis Hachibor Agado Mishneh Torah. They're printing the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. This is not the first print of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. The Mishneh Torah was printed in Italy numerous times in the 1470s, 80s in Rome. Then there was a Sansino print around the year 1490. Then there's Bomberg's print in 1524. But now we're at the next. I think this is the fourth Italian print of the Rambam in 1550. The Chashav Cain, and indeed he started and he got it done. By now, Nigmar Hadavar. He finished the project already. And he edited. One of the big issues in going into print is we need to get the proper text. We need to have the right girsa. And so he's working on that. There is no chaff left among the good over here. He did a great job editing this work. The Rama, in my view, did not see the addition of the Mishneh Torah. I say that, maybe I'll say later why I think that way. But this is obviously, he knows Rama Padua. I should mention here that his mother was a cousin with Meir of Padua, so they knew each other very well. Meir of Padua was also originally from this area in Poland. And so they knew each other, and he relied on him and trusted him. And this is what he means, I think, when he says, and he did a great job. Okay, but then what happens is, we get a different gentleman. This guy's wealthy. He stresses here, this guy is wealthy. And this guy says, I'm also going to do the same thing. I'm also going to print the Rambam. And this is what he did. Why? Why is he printing the Rambam if the Rabbi Meir of Padua is doing it? Because he's upset that Rabbi Meir of Padua didn't go together with him, but is doing it with gentleman number one. And so therefore, he's doing this lahachis. He wants to basically bankrupt Reb Meir because he knows that if Reb Meir isn't going to be able to sell his svarim, then it's going to be too much for him to bear. What does that mean? Basically, Reb Meir, clearly, the information he told the Rama is that he's financially invested in this printing, and you probably means he borrowed money, and he needs to pay back his debts by selling off Rambams. If, however, everyone's going to go buy it from printer number 2, so he's going to bankrupt Reb Meir. Reb Meir sends a question to the Rama, help me out, or essentially asking for a psak din that no one should be allowed to buy this second printer's Rambam. It could also be Rama was a relatively speaking young person in the year 1550, and it wasn't as well known as he became later. It's possible that he wanted the Rama to speak to other people in Krakow and other Rabbanim and to get them to do something about it. Papayo, the Rama wrote his tshuva, which is Simin Yud, and he will see what he's going to say in his tshuva in a moment. But now we need to take a break to actually look to see what are these Rambams that we are talking about. So these, here you're looking at the printing of Reb Meir of Padua. This is the title page of this edition. This particular edition is from the Rebbe's library right here. I saw it, had the privilege of seeing this yesterday. These are very large volumes. They're the size if your father has this very large chassan shas. So it's that type of that's the height of it, but also it's very, very thick svarim. They're huge svarim. Anyway, so this is the edition that the Meir of Padua is producing, and we'll blow up some of the parts to see it a little better. So here it says, Ushaftem mayim besasain, mi mayone hayeshua, is changed to mi maimone hayeshua, upon for maimoni. In other words, they're telling us about how special it is to draw water from the well springs of Moshe ben Maimon. Around, if you see the psukim that are around the text in the middle of the title page, those are 2 psukim that speak about how unique Moshe Rabbeinu is, and obviously they're presented here on this page because of a reference to Moshe ben Maimon. All right, the text in the middle here talks about how there's been a previous printing of the Rambam by Bomberg, which was edited by David Pitzington, Okay, and it says over here he's alive, but we know that by 1550 he actually is not alive. But that's okay. Anyway, and then he says, in addition to that editing of the 1524 Bamberg Rambam, here we get Morenu Harav Meir mi Padua and his son, whose name is Yehuda, and they're doing a second round of editing. So that's mentioned right there on the title page. Okay. Then we get further down at the bottom where they say, V'gam nitoisvu atoksas chidushim. There's also a little chidushim from Morenu Harav Reb Meir and his son. So in addition to them doing editorial work, they also did chidushim. Now that's interesting. This is why I don't think the Rama had this volume, because he didn't mention a thing about the chidushim. And if he would have, I think that would have come across, he would have mentioned this at least briefly had he seen it. So I think he only got the information that was given to him by the letters sent to him. Okay, so this is the top of the title page. This is the bottom of the title page. The bottom of the title page, you have these 3 crowns. This is the printer's emblem. Every printer then had a symbol. You put this on any book that you're printing. And so this is the printer, the gentleman, the gentleman. This is his 3 crowns. Now what it says over here is, here we get his name. It's nitfas b'mitzvas hasar. This is the language they would use. This printing was done by command of the nobleman or whatever. And then some honorifics here. The magnificent, I think, Mr. Alvis Bragadin. And then he gives his father's name here. Okay, Alvis Bragadin is not Jewish. Now this is important. In Venice, Jews were not allowed to run a printing press. So Bragadin could own a printing press, but nominally Jews are not supposed to be, they could work there at this time, I think. There were also some laws in this era about that I don't recall. But so Bragadin owns this, and then we get the date at the bottom over here where it says, you don't have to do the math. Trust me, this is the year 1550. Okay? And here's the city, Venezia. Here's a stamp, by the way, of a prior owner of this volume, Rafal ibn Sur of Fas. That's Fez in Morocco. Remember, this is the Rebbe's library. There's a number of volumes in the Rebbe's library that come from the Ibn Sur family. This is a very prominent family of Rabbanim in Morocco. I don't know exactly when and how parts of their library came over here, but that's a reality. Okay, so this is the title page of volume 1. And then, on the other hand, you get this page over here, and it has a little bit of a note. So let's read this note. It's authored by Mayor of Padua, and this is what it says. Here's a summary. Mr. Alvis Bragadin asked me to edit this work. Now that's interesting, because when you read the Tshuva of the Rama, it says that Mayor of Padua is not just, editing this work for someone else. Mayor of Padua partnered. It's his initiative, right? Here it almost sounds like he's someone working at his print shop. But it's very possible that the reason is because, again, from a legal perspective, Jews are not supposed to be leading the show here. So therefore, he's presenting himself here as, I was asked to edit his work. All right. But David Pizgion, this Reb David Pizgion from who edited the Bamberg edition, already did it. So what's the point? But I realized 101 times is better than 100 times, referring to the Talmudic passage about learning 101 rather than 100 times. So no problem. We'll do it again. Then he says, I also looked into the difficult passages of the Rambam, and together with my son, we wrote a commentary in the margin symbolized by a hand and the words Amar Hamagia. I'll show you what that means soon. We used 3 editions to edit the text of the Rambam, right? In order to get the right text, we used 3 editions. They didn't tell us. It's very unfortunate. Which 3 editions? Is it the 3 prior Italian editions, namely the Rome, the Sansino, and the Bamberg? Or is it others? Is it perhaps manuscripts? We don't know. I don't know, at least. If I didn't have backing from these 3, I left the text as is. Meaning, what if I found in the text of the Rambam something that didn't make sense to me? But that's the way all these 3 had it. So then I didn't change it. I left a comment in the margin, but I wouldn't have gone ahead to change the text. Then he says, I considered adding page references to the Talmud. What does he mean here? What he means here is that in addition to the Rambam, you have Mefarshim. And what do Mefarshim do? They always tell you, this din you could find in this perek of the Gemara. The Migdalois, this edition has, and the Maggid Mishnah. Now the issue is that when the Rishonim would refer you to a Gemara, it was always to what? The perek. Why didn't they refer you to the daf? Because there's no such thing as a daf. Everything was a manuscript. There was no daf. However, in 1524, between 1520 and 1523, Bamberg produced a Shas, And during those years of him producing the Shas, he put page numbers on them. And then when he printed the Rishonim, he referred, when he printed the Rashba and the Ramban, he used the same page numbers. So he's thinking, Meir of Padua is thinking, maybe the Migdal Oz sends you to a Gemara, or the Ravid sends you to a Gemara, or a Magid Mishnah sends you to the Gemara, maybe I should add the page numbers. But I chose not to do it. Why? Because some people prefer to study from older Svarim, meaning prior prints, or maybe even manuscripts that don't have this page system, and who says that future prints will keep the same system. This is really important. He's not sure what the future holds. Are we going to stick with Daf Beis Gimel Daled? Well, it ended up being that we did stick with it. But sitting in 1550, he doesn't know. And so he says, why should I invest in sending you the page numbers that may become obsolete in the future? What's interesting is, and we mentioned this in a previous class once, the Beis Yosef, right this year, prints his Beis Yosef, Erechaim, and he does send you to page numbers. And in fact, he's the first Gadol B'Yisrael that I know of who's using it. It's the same year. And so we see Meir of Padua is saying, I don't think this is here to stay. Rabbi Yosef Karo seems to be saying it is here to stay. That's really interesting. Okay, then it's signed at the bottom, Meir, the son of Yitzchak, Katzen Elenboigen. That's how he signs his name. So Maram in Padua's last name is the Katzen Elenboigen family. Okay, now you open into the Rambam, and I chose the page of tonight, meaning tomorrow's Perek Echad Shir, if you don't mind. Hilchas Nazirus, Perek Hasidi, and this is a good 2 pages. I took these pictures myself, so they're not as high quality as the other ones. You can see on the right it says Amar Hamagia with a little picture of a hand, and that's Maram Padua's note on tomorrow's Rambam. And then here we get another one, Amar Hamagia with a hand, and this is his note. This is not about the Nusach, this is about Pashat Pshat. In the Rambam, he's writing another commentary on the Rambam. Standard editions today don't have this on the page. Maybe they're printed in some editions in the back. Okay, so no, this is all printed. This is printing. This is printed material. Okay, now let's go weiter. That all is from the first printer, the first gentleman. Now we have his name, Alvis Bragadin. That's the non-Jewish gentleman. That same year, in the year Shin Yud, you have the following title page. Let's make it a little bigger so let's see if we can see what's going on over here. They write, we agreed to actually print what this Chacham Echad and Rosh Merabane Padua, he printed, his name is Reb Meir, and remember, he printed the Chidushim on the side, right? So we also chose to include it in this edition, but look what they write here. Shekasav Miliboy. Kasav Miliboy means, that's disparaging. Kasav Miliboy means he decided to do what he wanted, writing his own ideas, but this is not universally accepted or not a good idea. That he just was, they just printed this from the Bragadin print. And he stuck his head between the Kadmoin and Gdoilei Oila. Right? Like, why are you getting involved? You shouldn't be getting involved in them. And really, we shouldn't have printed them. So we knew, really, he shouldn't have printed them inside the Sefer. But we're printing it at the back. Okay. So that's basically the message right here. Could you imagine on the title page? Here, Venice, and here it says, Beis Ha'adoin Marco Antonio Justinian. That's his name. Now we have his name, the second printer, Marco Antonio Justinian. So it's Bragadin versus Justinian. Bishnas Shin Yud, that's the same year. That's 1550. Leprat Katan in Poi Venezia in the city of Venice. This is the title page. Then when you open the first page, this is, by the way, Justinian's printing emblem, where he has a picture, it says, Gadol Yeh Abayis HaZeh and Yoser Min Arishin, referring to the Beis HaMikdash, and there's a picture of the dome, that building that's on Temple Mount, which is very common in Jewish art at this time. We spoke about this once in a previous class. So what you have over here is a note inside where he's writing, the printer here is writing Justinian's servant or employee, Jewish employee presumably, unless it was someone who converted, a Jew who converted to Christianity. That's also something that happened. He's writing over here what they're doing. So he says, my boss Justinian prints Svarim for cheap. He was busy with the Gemara, so he couldn't do Rambam. Indeed, Justinian did print a Rambam, did print the Gemara in the years prior, the late 1540s, culminating, I believe, in 1550, 1551, finishing the Shas. Others rushed in to print the Rambam, but not doing a good job. They're doing it for the money. So Justinian has to print it ahead of schedule. Many wise people in this region asked him to print it because they don't want to tolerate that a rabbi of Padua wants to stand among the greats and impose his hand into this important book. Hand. Remember? Because that's the symbol. Okay. They don't want people to buy that edition. So in other words, they came to us and they said, oh yeah, please print this edition. These sages told us to print his glosses at the end of the book so that later we'll be able to print rejoinders to these comments. We're going to do it to slug them up. Because otherwise, we don't really believe they have value. Okay, then he continues. How could this rabbi forget that Rambam wrote that he didn't make anything up and that there's a source for everything? He should not have weighed in among the greats. They quote over here a passage of the Rambam where he writes a letter. If you don't understand what I'm saying, believe me, I based everything on Gemara, on the Bavli, on the Yerushalmi. Okay, so then there's no room for a commentary. No one should be writing, you shouldn't be questioning anything that Rambam wrote. In Maggid Mishnah and Migdalois, we reference the Talmudic pages, unlike that rabbi who was lazy. So we are going to do the dapim, they say. And this is the inside of his book. This is the beginning of Sefer Amada. And just for the fun, you'll notice how that has to be done in fancy woodcut letters, where each letter is in its own panel. The problem is that this system that they had, that they probably used in many different books, only had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, only had 9 panels. But there's 2 extra letters. Yesod is 11 letters, so that's okay. We'll just keep the other 2 hanging out. So Yesod HaYesod, Yesod HaYesod, but this is on the other ones. They use this for the beginnings, and very often it's not enough letters to accommodate the thing, and then they just have, in this print, in Justinian's print, they're hanging over. Okay, then we get to the end of volume 2. This is taka what they did. They put Maram of Remeir Katan al-Boigin, they put his Hagoyis at the end. This is what they wrote. Elohem hatoisafes shahoisiv. This I took a picture in the Rebbe's library yesterday. Elohem hatoisafes shahoisiv. V'kasav midaitoi harav Remeir mipadua. Again, he wrote this on his own. Not a good idea. Because Omar Amagia im hayad poshetes. He wrote it with with that hand. Pashat yodoi v'shalach yodoi mamalach elikim. He's sticking his hand where it doesn't belong. B'tfus hamaimani shala bragadin in Bragadin's Rambam. We publish them here so that every person should read them. If you like them, then good, endorse them. If you don't, so then you'll disagree with them and go ahead and disagree with them as you wish and as you desire. Now, there's a Rav at this time in Mitzrayim, the Radvaz. Maybe by this time, 15, I don't know years exactly, when he left Mitzrayim and went to Eretz Yisrael, that I don't know. So maybe he was already in Eretz Yisrael, 1550. There's a tshuva of his where basically someone sent him this and asked him for a comment and said, it's controversial, so please let me know, is this good or is this not? So we could see that basically someone read this and was like, oh, there's a controversy. Are these horrors good horrors or not? Let me ask the Radvaz about it. We're not entirely sure who asked the question. But we have the Shuvah the Radvaz, and the Radvaz basically goes, this one I agree with this, I disagree with. And I think he actually didn't agree, as is very common in rabbinic discussion, to disagree with many of the inyanim. Just because you disagree with something doesn't disqualify it and make it not Torah. That's an obvious point that I don't have to belabor. Okay, so this is what Justinian did. Now you're getting a little taste for this battle. This is nasty. This is dirty. This is not stama. You don't see all this from just learning the tshuva that Rama. But now when you see in these printings of the volumes, you'll see what's going on over here. This particular Rambam, this volume was it this? I can't remember right now if it was this Justinian volume or if it was the Bragadini. There's 4 volumes. There's 2 Bragadini ones and there's 2 Justinian ones. And one of them, when I was opening the Sefer in the library, I found a note from Rabbi Butman in Tavshin Mem Vav, writing to the Rebbe that Jack Lunzer is giving these 2 books. Jack Lunzer is giving these 2 books through his son-in-law Michael Scharf. Why is Jack Lunzer donating books to Lubavitch? So, okay, you guys are smart. You figured it out already. So I, with the help of Rabbi Heber, who's the son-in-law of Rabbi Butman, basically the story is as follows. This was during the period of the Mishpat HaSfarim. And there was an individual who removed in the summer and the spring and summer, the winter, spring, summer of 1985, the spring of 1985, removed Sfarim and Tavshin Mem Hey, 1985. this volume, this book, I'm pretty sure it's this one that we're looking at right now, the Justinian Volume 2, was removed. It's a very chashva sefer. It's an early print. This volume was removed. Jack Lunzer bought it. And then, when it was brought to his attention, what happened? He returned it. And so that note, Rabbi Butman has that note, and that note is still sitting in this particular volume of the Rambam. Okay, that was a text message I was looking at right before the shir, where Rabbi Heber was responding to me about that particular note. Oh, Jack Lunzer he's a very chashva book collector. He lived in England. He passed away a few years ago. He was a legendary figure in terms of collecting, and anyone who wanted to sell something would go to Jack Lunzer. This is so Google it, you'll see he's a very interesting. Okay, let's continue with the story. Now, Bragadin is publishing his volume, and remember, Justinian, they're both publishing at the same time. But Bragadin is ahead of Justinian. So when Bragadin comes to Chelek Sheni, to volume 2, he already knows what's going on, that Justinian is doing his work. So, in the beginning, the first page, he writes a letter, and here he's going to deal with this issue. He writes like this. This is actually the last page of the second, not the first. It's the last page of the second volume. So it's like after they finish the whole job and they're about to go to print, the last page that they're printing, not Rameir is writing this note. The one who's writing this note in Hebrew is Alvis Bragadin. Now, obviously, he didn't write it in Hebrew. He wrote it in Italian, and it was translated for him. What does it say? After finishing, I learned that Justinian published the words of one of his workers, because obviously Justinian didn't write that thing bashing the Hagoyes. It was one of his workers, right? So one of his workers bashing our marginal notes, saying it's wrong to criticize the Rambam. He doesn't realize that Maram notes are about explaining the Rambam, which brings honor to the Rambam. In some cases, yes, it's true, Maram or Padua does say Tzarich Iyun, but that's still respectful. My workers told me all of this. So in other words, he's saying, I know you know I don't know how to read this stuff. But my workers, who are Jews, they told me that it's written in a respectful tone, and I trust them. Justinian doesn't understand Hebrew, and he told the worker what to write, or the worker himself didn't understand the Hagoyes of Rameir of Padua. Either way, they're relying on the fact that some people only read the introduction, not the book itself. And so therefore they're going to say, oh, Rameir did a terrible thing, because some people only read introductions. He goes on to say, they write that they publish for the benefit of the Jews, and that's making it cheaper. False! The objective is to put me out of business and become a monopoly so they can charge whatever they want. He put Bomberg out of business, Bomberg's printing shop, which was very doing a lot of work in the earlier between 1510 and 15 into the 1540s, closed down a few years before this. He put Bomberg out of business, which has made books more expensive and rare. I will not be deterred. I will publish a Talmud better than his and a Tanakh. He will then rush to do the same, just as he did with the Rambam. As a result, books are going to be cheaper. Okay, here's capitalism. These are the words of Alvis Bragadin. He signs, and then there's a note by the translator where the translator says, these guys, they don't get our tradition. Is all about criticizing Sfarim. This is what we do. We write Hagoyes and Haaretz and Popolim, and that's like normal stuff. So this is the end of the Bragadin edition. But, don't worry, Justinian has to print his volume 2. So here we get Justinian's volume 2, and he also has a note in the beginning. This is in the beginning of his volume 2. And I'm not going to summarize what that note says, but you could suffice it to say that he comes out swinging as well, and but Poyol, this is what happened. Okay, so now we get a little taste for what happened over there, and with that we can go back to the sources and see what the Rama is trying to do. So what does the Rama want to do over here? The Rama's central argument is, what's the Rama's central argument? Don't tell me that Justinian could do what he wants, because under Venice law, he had the right to publish books. And that's, if you're going to be Justinian's lawyer, what are you going to say? You're going to say that he has permission under Venetian law. In the year 1550, he's operating right. And there's a system over there. It's not like they don't have courts. It's not like they don't have law. They have. So was hast du taina? He's following Sheva Mrs. Bnei Neach. Because there's courts of law that said he could do this. Comes the Rama and says, no, don't tell me Venice law. Venice law needs to be title law. In this area, this interpersonal dispute of a right to publish has to be title law. Either because that's what the Venice law really should be, even if it's not, but that's really what it should be, and therefore it's what they should be following, at the very least, because it's a Jew and Gentile who've come before us. And I believe that Halachah is going to side with the Meir, so therefore what did I show you in Perek HaGoizel? I showed you in Perek HaGoizel, then you have to paskin the Torah din. And so therefore, what does Rama now need to do? He just needs to do one thing. He needs to demonstrate that if you're following Torah and Halachah, imagine this were two Yidden, then Justinian the Jew would be wrong, and Bragadin the Jew would be right. That's what he needs to do. And he goes on to say that this is the case for 4 reasons. So let's see how much we're going to be able to cover. I'm not going to hold you too long, but let's get a little bit of a taste for what he does here in terms of the halachic sources. His first argument is based on the following Gemara. Baba Basra Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. Amar Rav Huna says, "Hi bar mavoya to uki rechaya." If you have one person living in a mavoy, a mavoy was many people living a condominium, right? Okay, and so one of them sets up a mill to grind flour. V'asar bar mavoya chavrei, and then another person in the mavoy, his friend says v'kamuki gabe, and he also sets up a mill. Dinahu dema'akev Eloi, the one who came first, can say, hey, this is my business over here to do the mill. People come, they bring their grain, I grind it for them, I make a few bucks. Now they're going to go to you. You can't do that. I have a shop over here. Damar le, he tells him, you're getting in the way of my parnasa. You don't have a right to do this. Now the emes is, and in the Gemara, it's a machloikas. There's another view that disagrees with Rav Huna, and there's another view that says, no, capitalism. You do you in yours, I'll do mine in mine, and that's the way the world operates. The machloek is this big tension in halacha between these two values and how to deal with it. And the Riv says befedish, we don't paskin like this Rav Huna. And the Rosh says befedish, we don't paskin like this Rav Huna. Another guy could set up another situation. However, the Rama argues, when is that the case? That's the case when it's not a clear damage. In other words, a lot of it is all question marks. You say, oh, if you're going to open up that shop, it's going to hurt me. Really? Do you know that for sure? You're speculating. You don't know it for sure. If, however, you know for sure that business number 2 is mamish going to get in the way of business number 1, then the Rama says and argues that we paskin like this Rav Huna. This is what he says. And he brings an example from the Rishonim, where the Rishonim discuss the case of there's a Jewish street, and there's a guy who runs a business at the end of the street. And non-Jews come to the Jewish street to engage the person in that business. There's someone who lives at the entrance to the street says, I'm going to open the same shop. Now the only way you could come in is from that street, and the non-Jews are coming in, and they're not comfortable in the Jewish street. Then for sure they're going to just stop off at the guy first. They're going to say, yeah, I know you, but I don't want to walk through the entire Jewish street all the way to the end to get my pants ironed. I'd rather get it done at the beginning. That's called Bari Ezeka. And in the case of Bari Ezeka, he brings from the Rishonim, there we're going to hold like Rav Huna, that you're not allowed to get in the way. So therefore he says, let's come to our case. Our case, what you have over here is, we have a business, that's the mayor of Padua, he's selling svarim. Someone comes after him and is starting to sell the same svarim. Is it Bari Ezeka? Is it sure? Or is it only speculative that there's going to be damage here? He says it's sure. Why? How is he sure? You could say, well, some people like this one, some people like that print. What factor makes it for sure that it's going to hurt him? He says the factor is, and he tells you a detail over here, interesting historical detail. Because the gentleman Hasheni announced that he's selling for 1 golden coin cheaper than Bragadin. You're selling 1 golden coin cheaper than Bragadin, that's for sure. Then it's Bari Ezeka. Bari Ezeka, then he's not allowed to do it. So that's interesting, because it sounds like, based on this argument, that if it would have been the same price, Rama would have let him go, at least inside this reason. But because it's Bari Ezeka, business number 2 is not allowed to come about and get in the way of business number 1. This is Rama's first argument. I should point out, there's going to be 4 arguments from the Rama. Each one of them is a shir. Because each one of them, so many of the Rishonim and Achronim have weighed in, and some of them, they're even a Gela Maisa today. But obviously, we only care about what the Rama is saying then in the year 1550, and we're not paskening Halachah Lamaisa here anyway. So that's number 1, argument number 1. Argument number 2, he brings from a Gemara in Baba Basra Daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph, where there's a strong mashmos from the Gemara that a Talmud Chacham has the right to sell and buy first. brings a story over there where there was Rav Dimi came to sell Greigerois, dried figs, and the Reish Galusa told Rava, if he's a Talmid Chacham, let him sell first. Applying that to our case, what would that mean? You have here two people that want to sell. One is a Talmid Chacham, a mayor of Padua. One is a non-Talmid Chacham, Justinian and his people who are working with him, even if there are Jews involved, but they don't have stakes in the business. There's no evidence that in Justinian sides anyone had he had Jews employed for him. With Bragadin, it seems that it wasn't just Jews were employed for him, though it sounds that way when you read the book. For the Tshuva of the Rama, it sounds like it was a partnership. It was an investment from Rama. So therefore, you have a Talmid Chacham over here. He comes first. He has a right to sell his Svarim first. Now he says, I know that may sound like you're using Torah for your business benefit. And doesn't it say in Pirkei Avos, Udi ishtamesh b'saga chalaf, that a person who uses the crown of Torah for his own benefit will, chas v'shalom, have a bitter end? So he says, actually, you know something? Look at Pirush HaMishnayos of the Rambam on that Mishnah. You'll find something very interesting. The Rambam very famously, in Pirush HaMishnayos, speaks at great length how you're not allowed to earn money from teaching Torah. You're not allowed to earn money from a shir. You put all the rabbis out of business, all the rebbes out of business, any Torah teacher in history, the Rambam is putting them out of business. No one agreed with this Rambam. Oh, I shouldn't say no one. Most Daily Yisrael didn't agree with this, but this was the Rambam's position. There, the Rambam says, however, there's some things that are mutter. What is mutter? And he gives the example of something the Rambam himself did with his brother. That is, the Rambam had capital, gave it to his brother, and his brother did business with it. And the Rambam stayed home to learn Torah. That is mutter. Because you're giving, you're doing, he's going to explain in a second why that's mutter. That's number one. Then he says, the second thing is, that when the Talmid Chacham comes to either buy or sell, you can say, you go first. That you're allowed to do. Why? He says, because business people often do this amongst themselves. It happens that a business person will say, you know something, I'll do some business for you, I'll bring you back the profit. Or that they let, an honorable person go first. So therefore, why should a Talmid Chacham be worse than an Am Haaretz? And so therefore it's done. But to mamish charge money for and to earn living from being a rabbi or being a Rosh Yeshiva or things like that, it's awesome. Okay, again, the Rambam's position is the Rambam's on the margins in terms of this particular position. But the Rama is using it to say, even the Rambam, who's Mr. Strict in this area, but he himself said, buying and selling first, that's mutter. Well, that's what's here. The mayor of Padua wants to sell first. You got to let him sell first. That's the second reason. By the way, if you follow the logic of this reason, it has nothing to do with who came first. Nothing to do with the fact that Bragadin's printing started first. The very fact that we have a Talmid Chacham versus a non-Talmid Chacham. Argument number 3 is the issue of buying from a Jew. We have here a Jew who's selling, in partnership with a non-Jew, and a non-Jew who is selling. Well, he brings from the Sifra that one should prefer to buy from a Jew over a non-Jew. He gets into a halachic discussion about, are there limits to that? What if the non-Jewish product is cheaper? That's a very relevant question, right? And that's what was happening there. He says, still, I think you still have to buy from the Jew, he says. There are other poskim that discuss this. We're not getting into it. This is what he says in this tshuva. And then the last thing he brings is the issue of an uncorrected book. What does that mean? The Gemara in Ksubas Daf Yutes Amud Beis says as follows. A person is not allowed to keep in his home a Sefer She'enoi Muga. What does it mean, a Sefer She'enoi Muga? Literally, it just means a book that's not edited. Now, you can understand this in two ways. When, in the period of manuscripts, you would commission someone to write for you a book. Right now, that book was written, but it's not Muga. So you could call that not Muga. Or maybe it means a book where you did that and you already found mistakes, and you know it has mistakes and it wasn't corrected. So Rashi says, Sefer She'enoi Muga min ta'u yois shaboy. Kind of sounds like the second way. It's not that it wasn't reviewed. In fact, it is known to have errors, so then you're not allowed to keep it. You got to fix it. It could be that it also means the first way. It could be that it's not enough just to hire a scribe. You also have to hire a magia to review it. But it's not the mashmos from Rashi. Anyway, you have 30 days to get it done, to fix it up. The Rosh says that although Rashi says this only applies to Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, this also applies to Svarim Acherim. Why did Rashi only say Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim? Because who said this? Rab Ami said it. In Rab Ami's day, there was no Svarim Acherim. Rab Ami's day, there was only Torah, Nevi'im, uksuvim. The implication is that in Rabbi Ami's day there wasn't a written Mishnah yet either, even though Rabbi Ami is an Amoira. So that's actually a broader conversation about the writing of the Mishnah that we can't get into right now. But the bottom line is the Rosh says that Rashi only said Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim because he's putting himself in Rabbi Ami's shoes. That's what Rabbi Ami meant. But now that we have other books, this applies to Gemaras. This applies to Sifrei Poskim. They need to be reviewed. Then he brings a Gemara in Baba Basra where there's a discussion. You have two teachers. One teacher moves very quick, covers a lot of ground, but he's not so medayik. Another one goes slow, but he's very medayik. Which teacher should you prefer for your child? It's a machloikas. One view says, go with the one who covers a lot of ground. Your kids are going to be reading improperly. They'll fix it eventually. Once they'll correct it. On their own, as they get older, it will be corrected. Rav Dimi says, no. Go with the one who's deliberate and methodical and slow. Why? Because when you start making a mistake, it's very hard to get it out of your head. And you don't want the teacher to teach you with a mistake. So that Rama says, the whole machlekes over there was when one is moving really quick, when it's either or. But here, we have two prints of Rambam. One print of Rambam, they're both decent prints of Rambam, right? But one is edited well, and the other is not edited well. So then, based on this teaching, which one do you need to prefer? You need to prefer the teacher who's medayik. The only svara to go with the teacher who's not careful is if he covers a lot of ground. Well, that's not relevant over here. Here you're getting the same Mishneh Torah. You have to go with the teacher, the printer that is medayik. And in other words, what he's saying over here is, I trust Rama of Padua to give us a good text of the Rambam. I don't trust Justinian, he's saying, to give me a good text of the Mishneh Torah Rambam. This is really interesting because when you look at the text of both Bragadin and Justinian's Mishneh Torah, they pretty much are exactly the same. There's a few different there, but Justinian's text is a very good text. Some have gone to say that in some ways Justinian's text is maybe even better than Bragadin's text. So that's an interesting thing, but let's take a step back here. Rama didn't see these volumes. He gets this letter from Rameir of Padua. Rameir talks about the investment that he's doing. He assumes that Justinian's Rambam does not have that investment, and so therefore he says that's a Sefer She'enei Muga, and therefore we should not purchase that one, we should be purchasing ours. These are the four reasons that he brings in his Sefer. And then he concludes the tshuva by saying, what if you're going to say, but look, these printers, they're doing such a favor, these non-Jewish printers, they're doing for us such a big favor by printing Jewish books, and if we make them mad, they're not going to print Jewish books. He says, no, that's not true. He says, Muskul Rishonhu, it's pretty obvious that these printers, they care about their own money, just like they do for everything. And if they're going to make a loss now, they'll print another thing. In fact, they'll be more desperate to fix their loss, and they'll find more svarim to print. In other words, so long that they have the ability to make money. They're not being kind to us. If you're being kind, you're like, oh, you said not to buy my book, I'm getting mad at you. That's not what's going to happen. They're not doing this out of chesed. They're doing this out of making money. So long that they see a profit in the Jewish market, they're going to go ahead and do it, so you don't need to worry about that concern. And he concludes the Sefer saying two things. One thing is, every Jew, lo yikneh shum adam, the Sefer Maimoni, that was printed, Michadosh Mikarev Bo, printed by Justinian, no one should buy. Only from Maram Padua, only from Rameir Katanel and Beigen Oiboi Koichai, or those he empowered. Then he says a further thing, that he's making a Cherem, a Nidoy, a Shamtan, a Cherem, that no one b'Medina Seinu, in our land, in Poland, should buy these new books, only buying the books of Rameir of Padua. In other words, he is announcing a ban in his land, in Poland. I guess he doesn't feel comfortable announcing a ban outside of Poland, but he is comfortable making a psak. His psak is universal. And by the way, he says it twice. He says in his tshuva twice that his psak is l'chal adam. But the cherem is only locally in Poland. You have to remember, Venice at this time is shipping books all over the world. They're reaching Eretz Yisrael, they're reaching Mitzrayim, they're reaching, for sure, they're reaching Poland. This is not a theoretical thing, this is a very, very practical thing. And this is the psak then that he gives. And let's now wrap this up with the following. In 1553, 3 years after this, the Talmud and many other Sfarim were burnt in Italy. There are those who want to link this story with that, saying that Justinian and Bragadin brought their dispute, slandered each other Hey, they print stuff, he's printing stuff against Judaism, right? And we could see, against Christianity, we could see they really hate each other. So they brought it to the authorities, and then eventually an inquisition looked into it, and then eventually led to the burnings of the Gemara in 1553. I just want to say the following. The period we're living through here is the Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church is very nervous about the whole Protestant Reformation and is taking measures to crack down. And these measures began before this dispute in 1550 for Jews as well. Oh, we need to be careful. What are Jews printing? And already in the 1540s, there's legislation in Venice, besides the fact that Jews can't own a printing press, but even whether they could work there and to the degree that they could work there, and discussions about censorship and all of that. And so therefore, you have to, I didn't look into this, but you have to really look carefully to actually make an assertion and say that this dispute led to the burning of the Talmud. You actually have to study the topic really closely. It could be this was the climate anyway, and it could be these were things were headed anyway. But what does this all mean on a practical level? On a practical level, it means as follows. The reason these non-Jews were fighting over this area was because they knew, as the Rama said, money. They can make money. Why do they know they can make money? Because Yidden, Jews, yes, there were some non-Jews too, but Be'ikr Jews were buying the Rambam. That's the reason. Jews were buying Sfarim. Jews were buying Sfarim l'roiv b'shefa. And that's something that's been a very strong part of our culture for a very long time, so much so that it drove this major dispute, this area of the market. And the Rama is aware of that area of the market, and that's why he says, don't worry, there's more money to be made over here. And that's an amazing thing. And that's something we should be proud of, the fact that we come from a tradition that's so interested in books, in learning, and in more learning. Halachas kama when it comes to the learning of the Rambam, that's something that we all can improve in as well. Okay, now, see you.